Good afternoon and welcome back to NASA's Johnson Space Center. Today we're having the post-mission management team briefing. This is for Flight Day 2 of the STS-134 mission. And with us we have Leroy Kane, who was the chairman of that meeting and also is the deputy program manager for the space shuttle. We'll open up with comments and then take questions. Leroy?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good afternoon. It's great to have Endeavour back in orbit. I think most of you probably saw the launch yesterday. It was after a very uneventful and flawless launch countdown. The launch itself and the Endeavour's climb, ascent into orbit was uneventful. It was completely nominal, and the performance of the vehicle, to include all of the elements, the engines, the solid rocket boosters, the orbiter, of course, Endeavour, and the external tank was just outstanding. I want to say a few more words about the external tank. You'll recall this was, excuse me, external tank 122, which has commonly been referred to as the Katrina tank. The performance of the tank, as I said, was outstanding. We had to do some work on that tank after it was damaged in the hurricane, and the credit goes to the entire team that got that tank ready to fly again. Frankly, there were some folks who questioned whether we would ever be able to fly that tank as a flight element in the early stages, and there's just a lot of hard work by a lot of folks. Of course, those that execute the manufacturing and the processing at the Michoud assembly facility just did an outstanding job getting that tank ready to fly. A lot of engineering and integration work done, as well as by the safety teams, and various risk-based assessments were done. And so just a lot of credit goes to all those folks that work so hard on getting ET-122 ready to fly. And as I said, all of the STS elements performed outstanding yesterday. And so Endeavour is on orbit, and the crew and Endeavour are in great shape. We had very little to talk about in the mission management team today. The items of interest that we have are very, very minor in and of themselves, and present no impact to any phase of the mission. So the performance of the crew and the vehicle is outstanding at this point. The crew, of course, when they got on orbit yesterday, did their normal Flight Day 1 activities. Today they got up and did the normal Flight Day 2 activities, to include the inspection of the thermal protection system, the reinforced carbon wing leading edge. All of that work has been complete, and we're getting all of that data to the ground, and we'll do our normal assessment of all of that data. In the mission management team today, we didn't review any of that because it's not available yet. The preliminary assessments that we have is that everything looks really, really good so far, and we're not tracking any issues as far as that's concerned. We will turn our attention here toward the rendezvous and docking, which will occur starting tonight. The crew gets up, I think, about 10 p.m. local time, and gets into their rendezvous procedures in earnest shortly after that, with the docking around 5:15 local time tomorrow. So we're very much looking forward to getting back to space station. This is an extremely important mission for us. I went down the hall in the control center and talked to the alpha magnetic spectrometer folks. They have their own little shop set up there around the corner from the main mission control center, and they're very excited. They're ready to get AMS safely on board the space station and get it activated. So that's an extremely important milestone for us, not just the agency, or not even just for our nation, frankly. And so a lot of folks around the world are watching intently, and we look very much forward to that activity. So things are going very well on orbit, and just as a programming note, you may know that this morning and today we rolled out, Atlantis rolled out of the orbiter processing facility and rolled over to the vehicle assembly building, and she's in the transfer aisle now in the vehicle assembly building. We'll start the mate operations for Atlantis to her stack, and in preparation for the next and final mission, STS-135. So we anticipate that we'll roll out to the launch pad on May 31st, if the schedule holds for where we are right now, And of course, that's the day before. It'll be in the evening of that day. That will be the day before our planned into mission for this mission that we have in orbit. So a lot of activity going on at the launch site. Obviously, a lot of activity going on here and in orbit, and that's the way we like it. So things are going really well, Kylie, and I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Leroy. We'll start with questions here at the Johnson Space Center. We can start in the back. Mark.
Thank you, Mark Perot for Aviation Week. And I think followed you on the TPS evaluations and just sort of looking at a sense of when the MMT would like to be able to clear or not clear the vehicle so the rest of the mission activities can follow the schedule you laid out.
Okay, Mark. The timeline that we kind of have established is somewhere on or about Flight Day 5 is when I would like to know whether or not the team thinks that we need any kind of focused inspection. Starting tomorrow, I think that there's a good chance sometime between tomorrow and about the middle of the day on Thursday we'll have our answer. That assumes that all the data comes down as planned and our normal evaluation timeline is that we're able to follow our normal timeline. In some cases, the team is able to get through it more quickly. But if not, it's kind of in the Friday time frame that I'd like to be able to make a decision like that.
Any other questions?
Phil Sauce with NASASpaceflight.com. For the Soyuz undocking and possible photo imagery on that, what's the timeline for the MMT in terms of making a final decision on that?
Yeah, Phil, we're working on that timeline right now. The plan has changed a little bit since launch day in terms of what we would like to do and how that lays out. And so we want the teams to be able to have the time to evaluate that. The normal plan would be for any vehicle undocking from the space station, they would do their normal process through their ISS MMT, and they would schedule it, the undocking go-no-go for a couple of days before that activity. In this case, with undock on Monday, they would normally do that in the Saturday time frame. They might like to move that up a day. So right now, I anticipate that we'll probably have that discussion on Friday, and leading up to Friday, then we'll have our MMT discussion where the shuttle piece of this is concerned from a dual docked ops. We call it dual docked ops because we're docked while another vehicle is undocking, if you will. So we'll have those discussions this week. I can't give you the detailed exactly of when the meetings will occur because the team is off assessing how much more time they need, and I've asked them to come back later today, probably not later than tomorrow morning, and let me know what that schedule looks like.
Any more questions here? Nope, seeing none. I know we have folks on the line, so we'll start with Bill Harwood, please. Bill, are you there? Let's try Seth Bornstein, please.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me? Copy.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me? Yes. Hey, I'm sorry. I apologize. Do you hear me now?
We can hear you, Bill.
I think I need to sell telephones or something. Okay. Leroy, let me just follow up on the last question if I could. I'm confused as to why you guys would even consider a fly around on short notice, given all the sleep shifting issues you have, dual docked ops, everything that's on the plate. It really seems like a hurried effort, given all the time you've already put into this earlier. And I just don't get it, so I'm just hoping you can give me some rationale for why you need to do it now, if you do it at all.
Sure. Okay, Bill. Yeah, we have spent a great deal of time on dual docked operations just generically for various different kinds of vehicle activities while the shuttle is present at the space station. We really leveraged off of all that work, which has been going on for a couple of years. We leveraged off of that pretty heavily when we had our discussions during the last mission. As you know, we had talked about doing this flyabout, if you will, sort of a pseudo fly around. And so a great deal of the work that we had to perform from a shuttle mission-specific standpoint, we did in preparation for doing that flyabout on STS-133. What the team is proposing that we do here on this mission is really just a variation of that activity. And it's really not a flyabout or even a fly around per se, as we've talked about before. The Soyuz will undock. We will do a small maneuver with the space station, and then we'll take some photographs from the Soyuz, and then the station will maneuver back to attitude, and that's really the extent of the activity. So from a shuttle preparation standpoint, we really just are going and reviewing the exact details of this plan to include, as I said, the attitude changes, the profile of the Soyuz, what the shuttle and station crew members are doing immediately before, during, and then following the undock activity to be able to support it appropriately. So it's really not a hurried up activity, and that's primarily because we are leveraging off of all of the work that's been done for literally a couple of years, and then to include a lot of work that we did for STS-133, and then this is really kind of a variation of what we were going to do on 133. And it's actually, what we're doing here is actually less complex in terms of the station maneuvers that we're going to do, and what was going to be a fly around on STS-133.
Okay, thanks. And could you give me an update on ET? I know you talked about the EP performance, and it was obviously, I didn't see very much, but I know you guys are tracking a few objects that came off. Can you update us on what you guys saw and what time frames you saw it in? Thanks.
Well, we really only saw a handful of items in the preliminary look at the ascent data, Bill, and those times and those items have not changed. We did not brief that in detail at the mission management team today. I know we have those events available and we can give those to you, but in summary, there were a couple of debris items from around the ice frost ramp and around the liquid oxygen feed line that were inside of the ASTT, and there were a couple that were outside of ASTT for a total of, I believe, five items on what we're calling 4 events, because one of the events had 2 items. So that's unchanged from our preliminary report that I think you got, that Bill Gerstmeyer and Mike Moses reported on after the launch yesterday. What I would point out, though, again, is that the performance of this tank really was outstanding. The assessments that were done in such a way as we were able to evaluate where we thought we would have some potential foam losses, both in terms of the area and to some extent the number of losses, and perhaps most importantly, the size of those losses. And that's how we did our risk-based assessment to be able to go fly this tank safely. And so what the team assessed in terms of the performance and the expectations for the tank, really we exceeded that by quite a bit. And what I mean by that specifically is we didn't have but only a few debris events. And the events that we had, of course, were, we believe, preliminarily less than the allowable in terms of size and mass. And so we were well inside of the risk that we were willing to accept and that we thought was acceptable in terms of debris from this tank. So that's really the part I would highlight in the story about ET-122. And as we go forward, Bill, we'll have every single detail on every event, and we'll make that available to you.
Okay, we'll move on to Seth Bornstein, please.
Yes, thank you. Actually, Leroy, continuing on the Katrina tank here, could you say, if you look at it with only, obviously it's preliminary, but only 5 foam events, did that sort of outperform the normal tanks, especially the normal post-Columbia tank, the redesigned tanks? So I'm wondering, not only did you exceed your expectations, did they perform better than the redesigned tanks?
Well, I don't know that I have enough data to say that, and it would be premature for me to say that. But certainly, it performed better than what most of our expectation was, and our expectation was that it would have very, very good performance, and that it was a perfectly good, safe tank to go fly because of the work that the team did. Not only the touch labor and the actual modifications that we did after the tank was damaged, but all of the work that we did in putting it side by side with our return to flight tanks, and the various modifications that we did, some of which we did on ET-122, but not all, as you know. And so I'm not quite, it would be premature for me to give you that kind of assessment. That would require me to have really all of the data in hand. But overall, it's very easy to say and very easy to see at this point that the performance was outstanding.
Just a second question, and last one from me. Any word from the pad, pad damage, and more importantly, what does that mean for 135 schedule? Was there any discussion 135 schedule, launch date, target date?
Well, let's see, the pad, the preliminary assessment of the pad that we got a verbal report on today is that it looks very good. There's no major damage. Preliminarily, we're seeing the kinds of small, very minor items that we typically see, and we'll get a full report on that in a few days. So there doesn't appear to be anything that's out of family or outside of the realm of what we expect for normal, quote, normal pad damage. And as it relates to the schedule, you may know that the pad turnaround is in the critical path, at least initially, for Atlantis's flow. Once we get out of the vertical integrated flow and head toward the pad, the preliminary indications, as I said, the preliminary indications are that the pad looks really good. So we didn't talk too much about schedule in terms of the launch date for 135. I can tell you that in very broad terms, we're probably looking at somewhere in the area of the first, somewhere between the first and second week of July. But we have to lay all that out and look at all of the things that are necessary in a normal vertical and pad flow, and then some things that are particular for this flow to include there was one or two holidays, of course. We'd like to understand how many contingency days we have, and then we're going to do the tanking test and the post-tanking test, NDE, and so all of those things we need a little bit more detail on before we can come up with a definitive launch date that we'd like to target as an NET launch date. And I anticipate maybe about this time next week we'll be able to have that discussion, if not sooner.
Okay, next is Robert Perlman.
Hi, just provide an update on SRB recovery and when you expect to see the footage from the SRB cam. Thanks.
Okay, Robert, the boosters are in tow. We expect them to be in port tonight, is what was reported today. And then and probably at Hangar AF within a day or so of then. So somewhere in the probably 24 to 48 hours from now, we'll have some video that folks can transfer over to us, and we can begin to take a look at it.
Okay, next is Denise Chow.
Hi, Denise Chow with Space.com. I was just wondering if there is a need for focus inspection. How will that fit into the timeline? It seems like a very packed mission. I'm just wondering what flight day that might occur on, and if you foresee any problems with the schedule.
I don't see any problems with the schedule. As you know, we had some additional capability that we were looking at in terms of plus 2 days on our previous launch attempt. And as we moved to this launch attempt yesterday, all of our assessments said that it would be best if we just go ahead and add those 2 days. So we started out with a 16 day mission. It's really 16 plus 0 plus 2, the plus 2 being undocked days at the end of the mission to give us our normal capability for end of mission and weather delays and systems problems. We have a lot of capability above that on orbit because we had an on-time launch and because several other factors are coming into play to include the AMS power consumption is not what it was anticipated, and so we've got some additional capability. Beyond all of that, we have some opportunity in this timeline to be able to move things around. You know, because of the launch delay and because of the 2 additional days that we added, the teams worked very hard to come up with a timeline where they could take individual flight days and kind of plug and play them at various places throughout the mission to be able to optimize the performance of the crew, the shuttle and the station crew, as well as the guys on the ground. So it's really a pretty good setup in terms of us being able to change things as we go along if we see a need for that. With respect to focused inspection, I think we have it penciled in on flight day 6. Depending on what the area is and why we think we need a focused inspection and all of the particulars around that, you know, we'll add as much time to that activity as we need because obviously at that point it's a critical or at least a very important and high interest activity for us. So I think this timeline, you know, will accommodate us if it comes to that. And beyond that, I wouldn't want to speculate because I'd have to have some significant problem before that even becomes an issue. So we're in really very good shape with respect to the timeline.
Okay, next is Todd Halverson, please.
Hi, Todd Halverson of Florida Today. Leroy, I was wondering if you could speak in general about what the concerns are with other vehicles docking or undocking with a shuttle present at the station, and what in particular makes the Soyuz departure in this case acceptable? And I've got to follow.
Well, when vehicles are at space station and they undock and then they have to do maneuvers and separation and in some cases at least some portion of a fly around to get on their proper trajectory to depart from the area, they have to fire thrusters or whatever attitude maneuvering system that they have. When you do that, then you just want to make sure that the other vehicles, to include the space station frankly, but and the solar arrays and the other vehicles that are docked there are clear of the zones where you might have any plume impingement or anything of that nature. So that's one of the concerns. So what you have to begin to look at is for an activity like this, you know, what port is the vehicle coming from on the space station relative to where the shuttle is docked? And what profile does it fly? In other words, when it undocks and then separates, you know, which direction does it go? And then you have to analyze plumes. And when we do that, we don't just analyze the nominal trajectory. We analyze an off nominal with an envelope around that with some uncertainty. And so we do it in a way that's relatively conservative, although that's where our confidence is derived from, is that we can handle the worst case, if you will, if you want to think about it that way. In this case, it's been looked at extensively for a Soyuz undocking from this port with the shuttle docked, and so again, as I mentioned earlier, we've leveraged off a lot of the dual docked ops activities that's been done for the last couple of years. And those are the kinds of things that we look at analytically and the areas that you might have a concern.
Thanks. And just a couple more from me. I was wondering if clearances between docking ports are of any concern, physical clearances between vehicles at this point. And to follow one of Mr. Harwood's questions, you were talking about if you did decide to go do a Soyuz fly-around, that you would undock and then the station would make a small maneuver before pictures were taken. Is that a pose being taken by the space station, or exactly why do you do that little maneuver?
Well, let's see. Let me address your first question about vehicle separation. Turns out when you go do these kind of activities, at least from a shuttle centric standpoint, if you have enough capability and enough clearance from a, and we'll just go back to plume impingement for a minute, by the time you have the clearance and the capability you need, or if you want to think of it, the protection for the shuttle, you by definition have enough physical separation of the vehicles, because what you find out is when you begin to envelope and then put some uncertainty on those envelopes for the actual plume environments, you are physically separated a pretty good distance from one vehicle to the next. So the actual, how close to the vehicles get really doesn't become an issue because of what you're doing to protect for the plume impingement. With respect to the maneuver, it's really, as I understand the plan that the folks are working on, it's really a maneuver that will just allow from the Soyuz vantage point, it will allow the crew on the Soyuz to get a little bit better photo in terms of getting a better perspective of the entire space station and the vehicles that are docked to it. So rather than just looking straight up or down one axis or in plane, if you will, it's just to get a little bit better perspective and to get a little bit better photography overall in terms of lighting and all of the considerations in that regard.
Thanks. That's all.
Okay, thank you. That's all on the line. Did we have any follow-ups here? Go ahead, Mark.
Mark Rowe for Aviation Week, and I had a follow-up question on the flyabout. I think some of the discussion last week was that you might not be able to get the quote high-quality window view for the photography. That may have all changed, and I just don't know if there's anything you might be able to update with regard to that. In other words, it was sort of like you could get a good shot, but it might not be of the highest quality that maybe you would have from the previous planning. And I just wondered if that's changed, or your goal is the highest quality or a good shot.
Well, you're talking about details of the plan that frankly, the team still needs to brief to us. I can tell you that my understanding is, obviously we want to get a high quality photograph. There wouldn't be much point in going to any efforts on an activity like this if that wasn't our plan. I think that in looking at it in a little bit greater depth and detail, the team was able to figure out a way that we can get the crew members in the Soyuz in the right places at the right time to be able to take high quality photos. And so we're going to have a lot more detail on exactly what we're doing and how it's timelined and who's doing what and which vehicles and on. And we can report that out to you, and I would intend to report that out to you before we get to that point. Now, this is an activity that will be performed, and we would execute this on Monday of next week. So we have a little bit of time, and I anticipate we'll get some more details on those.
Okay, with that will wrap up our Flight Day 2 coverage and our briefings. We'll send it back to Mission Control here momentarily, and during the crew sleep shift, we'll be playing the video highlights from Flight Day 2 at the top of the hour. And then the shuttle crew is scheduled to awaken at 9:56 p.m. Central Time tonight and start getting ready for docking. And Endeavour's docking to the International Space Station is scheduled for 5:15 a.m. Central Time Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining us.